Welcome to Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Christianson. Look, you know that between the latest online fads and the crazy media headlines, it's easier than ever to get confused about your health. And you and I just want to feel better and live longer. We want to know what works. And we can't wait for further studies. We need to make decisions today based on the best evidence we've got. Well, that's exactly what this show is here for. So let's get to it. Can the brain repair itself? Can it regenerate after damage? What about when it's hurt through chronic disease? I brought in a friend of mine, Dr. Greg Eckel, to talk about some of the latest advances in neuronal repair. Dr. Greg was the co-founder of Nature Cures Clinic in Portland, and he's focused on chronic degenerative neurodegenerative disease for many years. I knew Dr. Greg as he got into this and as his focus shift. Pretty gripping story. His wife, Sarieah, passed away from Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This is a really rare chronic neurodegenerative condition, no known cure for it. Sadly, Dr. Greg did not find a solution for her, but what he found was there are great answers that can help many other conditions like post-brain trauma, Parkinson's disease, and other types of neurodegenerative conditions. So please enjoy this talk with Dr. Greg Eckel. Hey, Dr. C here with you. Welcome back to another episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. I'm really excited about this, the topic, the person. This is super important stuff. So this is a dear friend, Dr. Greg Eckel. I've known him for a long time, and we're covering something that's just critical to, our aging, disease process, quality of life, how well our brain works. So super important stuff. Dr. Greg, welcome aboard.
Hey, thank you for having me on, Dr. C.
So this will be really cool. The big myth that I think is the central topic of the discussion is that, we have this idea about our bodies repairing themselves, but in many cases, we assume that does not apply to the brain, that it's what you've got is what you've got. If it's damaged, that's it. So the core issue is really, can the brain regenerate? That's what I want to go into with you. So let's first just talk about that topic in a way that just however depth you want to go into. And we'll talk specifically about ways that it can degenerate and then ways that one can actively help it to get better. So the brain itself, how well can it regenerate once we've got adult cells?
I am here to tell you, I always leave the door open. So there's this component of not wanting to provide false hope. And what happens in Western medicine is they're basically in a status of we will believe it when we see it. And there's a component to that statement is they won't see it until they believe it. Because if their belief system is the brain can't heal itself and they're never going to see it. And we have actually Superman to thank for this. Christopher Reeves was paralyzed, right?
Yeah, horse accident.
Up to that point, you could never regenerate. You couldn't come back from that injury that he sustained. And he said, you know what, this is my life. And he threw a lot of money at it, but actually got his physicality back and was able to walk again. Now, with lots of
that.
Yes. So that was over a decade ago, I believe. Don't quote me on the date, but we have Superman to thank for this thinking process, and that before he did that, it was never possible. And so it showed up to that point, we thought there was no neuroplasticity of neurons, that they could not repattern, they could not regrow. And now, fast forward with all of the therapeutics and everything that we're seeing, I will tell you, I am seeing patients with neurodegeneration, Parkinson's in particular, but multiple sclerosis as well, that have no evidence of disease. Now, I'm not making 100% claim, but I've seen very advanced patients. I have one testimony up on YouTube. Cindy traveled here from North Carolina. Very advanced stage of Parkinson's disease. Couldn't get off of her couch. Couldn't get dressed. Got super depressed. Didn't really want to go in public anymore. And she came out. We did some groundwork before she got out here. Came through my Camp Nature Cures and Brain Regeneration program. And she called me last summer from the park, so excited. She said, Dr. Eckel, my husband told me to slow down in the park. And I said, what do you mean your husband told you to slow down in the park? I said, when is the last time he ever said that to you? Because this woman wasn't really even walking anymore. She was falling forward, needed to use a full 3-point walker, and still had difficulty walking. She said, it has been over a decade since he has said anything like that. I'm so ecstatic and just through the moon, through the roof to the moon, so to speak. And it is possible, while we're not claiming 100% cure, we have seen it happen with our patients because we think differently and we're not treating that end stage process. We're treating the whole dynamic heart centered being in front of us and giving the innate intelligence the information, and most importantly, removing obstacles to cure. So, from Superman to Cindy, yes, the brain can regenerate itself. And we're seeing it time and time again.
That's really incredible. And what was the time frame that she was
So,
already pretty
yeah,
well
so
debilitated for some time, or?
this was 8 months. So, a good portion of my 8 month period was holding the space and cheerleading, saying, there's basically, in my research here, clinical um, outcomes, we have a 95% success rate. Now, I put air quotes around success rate because what is that? That is not a cure rate. That's not total resolution of Parkinson's and neurodegeneration. That is improving the quality of life of 95% of the people that we see. So, whether that be improving their sleep, their mobility, their tremors gone, their voice comes back, we've shown significant improvement. So, it's not just me saying, hey, you're better. It's the patient saying, I actually feel different. And then on exams, we can see the difference in real life. And so it was 8 months for Cindy. We're talking about regenerating the brain and changing central nervous system. So some of those processes can take some time. Now, that said, and we're going to talk about this new technique that I've incorporated in. We are seeing much faster results with a new technology that we brought in called V cells, very small embryonic like stem cells. So we'll put that kind of in the right order. But I just want to mention, and I don't want to limit anybody's potential for healing as far as my word being dictating the way somebody's healing goes. And am I going to use a placebo language? Damn right I will. Like, if that will help implant a healing thought or vibration for somebody, I will definitely use that, right? But I'm not going to use the nocebo, which is saying in a negative fashion, having a negative impact.
Mhm.
And that said, of course, I want to get more data, more research along those lines. But these are, as of yet, these are conditions in neurodegeneration where people don't have a lot of hope. You get these diagnoses and it's like a death sentence. It's either, agreed upon with the diagnosis. Well, you're either going to slowly or quickly decline, but you're going to decline, right? And so to see it with, I am a scientist and I want to see the frickin' results. And I'm impatient that way after 21 years of practice, and I always have to hold my horses, so to speak. And somebody's going to be on their own journey in their own time, and it's their body and their path dictating what's going on. And sometimes this takes some time. Other times it's 30 minutes to an hour after one of these procedures, and we've had like miraculous results, never seen before. And you kind of have to say, is that really happening? And the patient reports back like, yeah, I don't feel any tremor. I've got my voice, and they're like, their face comes back. They get rid of the matte face, the expressionless mask, and their
Oh.
movement is there. I mean, it's like phenomenal.
So in terms of diagnoses, let's first talk about the main conditions we'll be considering in this discussion. And then you sent me some data about some real underlying drivers of those big conditions, some real key causative factors. So yeah, what are the main disease states that you're referring to as this blanket of neurodegeneration?
Yeah. So, in particular, Parkinson's is a big category of. I wrote a book called Shake It Off, an integrative approach to Parkinson's solutions. And so, in the neurodegenerative component, any prionic activity. So, prions are misfolded proteins. So, this could be mild cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's. all of those have different misfolded proteins. So that's one category, and I'll explain why I picked on prions, and but perhaps the viewers don't. So I'll share that. And then the other component is autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, autoimmune encephalitis. So those are the bigger ones on the autoimmune immune system degradation of central nervous system category. Third category then would be traumatic brain injuries, from concussions, blunt force traumas, micro traumas to the brain. That goes kind of in its own particular category because it's not an immune system and it's not from prionic activity or levels of toxicity in our environment, but more from our physical bodies in time and space and the jolting that happens with our central nervous system floating in the cerebral spinal fluid and banging into our hard skulls.
So very different things, but all leading to similar types of harm to brain cells, similar to degeneration. Would that be correct?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and so in neurodegeneration, brain health, longevity, kind of that continuum is where I put the flags in the earth in developing a process of evaluation and exploration, and then finally program development. I call it my fancy approach, FAN-C. And so that is the framework that I kind of makes sense to my mind. And it's a great way to talk about it because we get to treat people, the heart centered dynamic beings, rather than a diagnosis, end stage process, or the pieces and parts, right? We are way more dynamic than the pieces and parts. Of course, a proper diagnosis is important to understand the pathology, mechanism of action. But what I'm seeing in particular in neurodegeneration is really it's a constellation of symptoms that then the diagnoses get piled on the further one lives. And people will
Mm.
collect 5 or 6 different, like, oh, it's a Lewy body disorder. It's a subset of Parkinson's or ALS and a motor neuron disorder. But unfortunately, for all of those categories, there's no known cure or really an effective treatment. There's some symptomatic relief, some delaying of symptoms or progression, but really nothing stops the process and really nothing addresses the underlying root imbalances for these folks. Um, and so how I got into prionic activity was that component of in my life and coming to writing this book and creating a brain degeneration summit and really picking on Parkinson's out of the get-go is my wife Sarieah passed multiple years ago, and it was she died of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is a prionic condition. Similar, it's in cattle, it's called mad cow syndrome. In sheep, it's called scrappy. In deer, it's called chronic wasting syndrome. So all of the animal kingdom has prionic activity and the conditions. And so in people, it's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So that rolls off the tongue very easily. This disease process, though, it's a brutal condition in that it's rapidly progressing dementia. And, it was an 18-month program that we went through with her from vital being to pretty much leaving her body. And I don't want others to go through that process as much as I can help. So I wanted to turn my own suffering path into some victories for a lot of people. And being well positioned in that practitioner and loved one, I swung for the fence. Now, unfortunately, what I discovered didn't help Sarieah. She was too far progressed, and that pattern was going. What I'm finding though, in the 3 years since that time, I mean, what we discovered on that path is helping thousands of people now, and really lit a big purpose under my tuchus. And and I get to talk to people around the globe now with these diagnoses and provide some inspiration, some energy, some passion, and some hope, and actually real life evidence that we're assembling the right therapeutics in the right order with the right assessment and actually moving the needle for them. So that to me, I mean, is if I'm going to do something with the remainder of my time on the planet, this seems like a valiant effort. And really I'll get a little choked up, in loving memory of Sarieah. I mean, it was my loss and her leaving that really inspired me to do this. And, um, so I just wanted to turn that, open my heart up to humanity, in such an odd way. It really ripped me open again as a human being, and has given me a ton more compassion for suffering, grief, loss, all of that, and really informed what we're doing with people. So, I mean, I guess for that, I'm forever grateful. And in this category of helping people and being in service. Yeah.
I got to say to the audience, I've known you for some time and I've known you through that process. And it was really just amazing to see. I was, speaking to you as you were going through that and wasn't sure how it was going to play out. And yeah, it was just I got to say, it was just an inspiration, as
Mm.
far as how painful it was. And, you weren't like masking or denying the reality of what you're going through, but the way you just really transformed and have made this into such a positive thing to help people. It's been really cool to see that. So
Mm.
yeah, kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a pretty big curveball, and we all get various sizes. But that was a massive one, and you did a phenomenal job just taking that and doing something positive from it. So very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I would say it was not easy, and it's the only life we've got. So, uh, I am a radical optimist, even in times of extreme loss. It was a big loss, and still feel it. And I personally, I don't really want that pain to go away, because it was real, and it was mine. So, that aspect. I mean, just in particular, the skill set that I grew around loss and grief and sadness, it was definitely firsthand. And it's I hear that from a lot of folks of like, hey, that was really inspiring to see how you transformed that, or how you survived and navigated that path. And one component is to actually be able, I mean, I have been able to cry publicly, and I find that as a blessing. Like, there's no need to bottle up or save others from your suffering, in that it's your experience. You should have your experience. And so, as one example for folks and people listening, maybe you have your own loss or your own grief. I mean, it's part of the program of being born, right? And so just express it. My encouragement and for you is just to get it out of your body, because that stuff, unresolved grief and sadness, what I have seen, and I think that you've seen in your practice, is when you don't get it out of your body, it causes dis-ease. So we don't want you to have that trapped in the body. You got to get those emotions out. So that just kind of came to me here. I know we're talking on brain health,
It's all good.
but
It's great advice.
it is a biggie, to have, because we do not do grief well in our culture. And so that was a big life lesson, and really a lot of learning around being okay with my emotions, even if it caused others discomfort. It was their own stuff that they hadn't really dealt with anyway. So it, like, just one's own grief resonates with others. But I will tell you, because I've gone through it, and I went through it pretty publicly, I have a lot of people come to me. Not to be like the grief beacon, and I don't want to be the grief beacon, but people feel very comfortable sharing what's going on with them with me. And it's really what I've heard in a kind of a majority of folks, is that others projecting emotions onto the person with the loss is sometimes harder than the loss itself. Like, there's
Huh.
this expectation of, oh wow, what a tragic loss, and then it gets projected on, like I would get projected on whatever the unresolved grief or sadness of the individual was. And that's uncomfortable. It's like, all I need you to do is be present. Like, I'm not looking for
Mm.
sympathy or your emotions. I mean, you're welcome to have your emotions too. But really, what's helpful for somebody, I found, at least for me going through it, was just people to be there, be held, be noticed, be seen, be heard, embraced, supported, rather than that kind of big drama kind of that gets portrayed in the movies or on TV.
So that's hugely helpful. Just to say to someone outside what's the best way they could, that the responses are the most helpful, we found the most useful. That's great. I think that's a struggle people have, is just not really knowing, what
What
to
to
say,
do?
what to do,
How do
and
I best support you? I always heard that as well. How do I best support you? Is like, I don't know. I've never gone through this before. Like, I don't know what I need. Uh, Now going through it, I got very clear and direct and um, components which went into actually my fancy approach to brain regeneration was around this ancestral trauma and loss, in that it did make my job much harder as a provider to understand epigenetic changes that could have happened with my great 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 grandmother, right? Down the line of some trauma in the family history that now is expressing itself now. So we had to really look at that with Sarieah's lineage, etc. But going through that process, really discovered certain therapies that really helped understand and help me get in touch with, well, what actually are my needs in this situation. I've never gone through it before, and so now I share that with my patients going through, like, having this diagnosis of a chronic illness with no known cure is can be quite devastating. Like, there's a lot of grief associated with that. There's depression, sadness, isolation. All of these things can come up with some of these diagnoses: Parkinson's, mild cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis. It's not a great, pretty picture when you get on the internet and start researching those things. And so that grief,
something about
yeah, that grief process is a big piece to make sure you're taking care of that, kind of your royalty of your emotions and your sovereign being. That we need to address that. Like, that's the big elephant in the room when folks come in or get on a consult, etc.
something I've thought in situations like that where someone is struggling with grief, the well-intended comments of, what can I do to help? I wonder if there's times in which, the person, they have a trauma, and now you're saying, okay, in addition to the trauma, I want you to put some work into figuring out what my role is. You don't even know what your role is or what to do, but I want
Yeah,
you to also figure out what I can do, because I don't, that's
yeah,
putting
I
more and
know.
more things right now.
Yes. And that's exactly it. Like, the person going through the loss or having the grief is in a state of trauma. Like, it's traumatic. And then it is that component of, like, I can't take on anything more. Like, I don't know what I need, and if I can't take on your stuff too. So, and that was my personal experience. Maybe,
Right.
maybe that resonates for other people to, have people ask them. But when I pull people and I ask people around, like, well, how's that going? And certain stories come up around, like, others' experiences of grief. There's a great resource out there. There's a book that I came across. It's called "It's Okay to Not Be Okay." An awesome resource
It's
for
okay to
folks.
not be okay.
Yeah, because it's we want to make everything right and feel good about it. But that one, and then there was the other book called Second Losses, of a woman that went through grief, and now she's kind of really helping other people with their grief process, and she does a really great job of helping folks with all kinds of loss and grief. You know,
I'll find those, get those in the links too.
cool.
So yeah, you mentioned about the prions, the metals, big things, and so there's ways in which, if one can address the cause, the body has its own means to fix itself. By and large, if they can be taken care of, I think that's straightforward enough. The but now we think too about ways in which we can stimulate things further. And you've got a lot of passion talking about the stem cells. We'll talk about that. You mentioned you forwarded some data about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So let's dive on into some of the therapeutics that you're seeing promising, and
So
let's talk about the stem cells. Oh,
sure.
go ahead.
Before we get into that, so because that's where
Okay.
everybody wants to jump to, of like, what can I do about it? And so the aspect, so that all kind of that grief discussion came out of the functional approach, really, of addressing the heart-centered being moving through time and space, not the pieces and parts. And then A is the assessment in my fancy approach. And so a proper assessment really is critical. And you were asking me this, and I took us down the grief pathway there. So I just want to make sure we handle the assessment
Good.
aspect of it.
Let's do it right.
And the three pillars that what happens in neurodegeneration is you get parked, you go, oh, it's brain, go talk to the neurologist, here's your diagnosis, here's the medication, and then we'll see you in 6 months or a year, and we're going to evaluate how much you've gotten worse.
Mm,
And it's either now or later, but eventually you're going to start getting worse. That's the agreed upon method. So if we
mm,
start thinking outside of the box, and in particular, I'm gonna focus in on Parkinson's here, but this goes for all neurodegeneration, is looking at other causes. Because we are in our environment, and we see with Parkinson's there are levels of toxicity in our environment. I've found heavy metals to be a big causative agent, pesticides. There are chemicals and solvents in dry cleaning, actually, that are really implicated in creating Parkinson's symptoms. So, glyphosate and solvent pesticide toxicity is also implicated. And you look at, well, why does environment play such a big role here? And I do think, and we don't have this mechanism of action dialed in, but this is the billion-dollar question: is why do proteins misfold? And I am coming to that in that, and I ask that to PubMed all of the time. Every day I wake up, why are the proteins misfolding? And I think it's as a protective mechanism. It's a level of toxicity, and so they're just misfolding. And then once one misfolds, it starts signaling the others, like
huh.
protect yourself. So they get called, quote unquote, infectious prions. There's no infection regarded to a prion. In fact, it doesn't really have much cellular data in it at all. It's an empty shell of a protein that misfolds, and it starts triggering other ones to misfold.
Huh. Almost like a crystal formation or
Yeah, almost like it's some cell signaling
passive
event.
process. Yeah.
Yes. And there is a really compelling hypothesis called the Brock hypothesis, showing that Parkinson's may start 10 to 20 years before in the gut, before it starts showing up in the central nervous system. And uh, Professor Brock took mice, and in half the group, he severed their vagus nerve, cranial nerve 12. And in the other half, sorry, cranial nerve 10, I misquoted there. And then in the other half, he kept the vagus nerve intact. And he put alpha synuclein, which is the misfolded protein in Parkinson's. And that's how I chose Parkinson's, because very few people have Creutzfeldt-Jakob. It's 1 in a million, about 300 cases a year. A lot of people have Parkinson's, and it's actually on the rise. Well, in the group that he severed the vagus nerve, that group of mice did not develop Parkinson's. In the other group, they
Hmm.
did develop Parkinson's. So it's called the Brock hypothesis. And we do know, as more and more evidence and data comes out around the microbiome, is that the gut is the second brain. We know our neurotransmitters are manufactured in the microbiome. So you have to have an adequate gut microbiome to create the right neurotransmitters for your brain. Of course, diet plays a role there too, of having the substrates, but the bacteria have to be in proper ratio, and you have to have the right gut bugs.
Yeah.
So the Parkinson's, and one of the early symptoms of Parkinson's is actually constipation, a very common symptom, right? You know that in the thyroid adrenal realm and hormones. So it is kind of a generic symptom, but it can be 10 to 20 to 30 years before, if you have undiagnosed or you don't have a cause for the constipation. These are, I'm not, saying it to raise fear, but you definitely need to get it evaluated. And that is one part of the testing. We test for the microbiome. It's one leg of the stool. So we got the heavy metals, and we test for the microbiome. The third leg of the stool that we look at is around hormone balance. And, if I ask really across the board with neurodegeneration, but again, I'm going to pick on Parkinson's, what happens when you get stressed? It's like, oh, my tremor gets worse, my voice gets weaker, my gait is even more imbalanced or more stuck. All of the symptoms get worse. Same in multiple sclerosis, gait imbalances, flu-like symptoms, feeling ill, fatigue, along those lines. Well, why? What is that? Well, that's the connection of the hormones at the hypothalamus front, right? We got the hypothalamus. I call it the switchboard operator. I imagine a little tiny being in there connecting the signal from the central, from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system into the right region of our brain. And they get a little fatigued and disorganized. So we need to check out what is going on with the hormonal regulation, because that plus the nervous system come together at that central spot for homeodynamic regulation. I used to call it homeostasis, but I don't want to promote stasis in any form or fashion in our bodies. As we learned in medical school, we called it homeostasis, that we're in static
Yeah.
relationship.
The only stasis is in death.
That's death. I like homeodynamic regulation, because that's really
That makes sense.
the dance of what we're doing. So those three are like the bare minimum, lowest bar as far as a proper workup for neurodegeneration. And these things actually can move the needle for folks. So that leads the discussion as to what's the most logical step for this individual, because it's not just everybody do omega-3 fatty acids or dopamine precursors, or along your favorite neurotropics, and we'll talk about those. The B vitamins, of course, have to be in that discussion. um, the omega-3 fatty acids are essential for decreasing neuroinflammation, DHA in particular for brain food, for neuronal health. We want other things that increase BDNF, brain derived neurotropic factor. Um, so those are essential. The endocannabinoid system needs to get discussed here. Again, was not known when we went to medical school. And we have Professor Machulam out of Israel. He's one of my heroes. I like to mention his name on the interwebs whenever I'm interviewed, because he and his team out of Israel are the ones that discovered the endocannabinoid system. There's some great research about CBD, cannabidiol, in helping regulate nervous system function. There's way more cannabidiol receptors in the brain than all of the neurotransmitters put together, which is a little bit hard to even comprehend because there are so many hormonal receptor sites. And so there's this whole other system we didn't even know at the beginning of my practice that's now part of the discussion. So that's all in the nerve health. That's the N of the fancy. And then we have the dash C, that's the sexy stuff, right? The cellular regeneration. And that's what Christopher Reeves as Superman also put in. There's some amazing research on quadriplegics coming out of China, doing tissue grafts with stem cells directly into spinal cord lesions to help regrow brains. And what we're showing now is we just kind of unclassified a huge category called these V cells, which I had no idea what they were. And I didn't learn about them in medical school. These were in our Western medical model, was in our arrogance. We said, oh, that's just detritus waste. There's no living anything in that cell. It's a dormant cell. We could probably just, filter them out, of course, right? And what was discovered is by Dr. Radachak at a University of Kentucky in 2005, is that these cells, this is how we formed in utero in our mother's bellies, is that these V cells, they're embryonic like. So they're very small embryonic like stem cells. Well, we can turn those embryonic like cells back on with a photoacoustically dynamic, coherent wave of light. Sounds very sci-fi, but is true. And then direct that with laser. So it's laser activated and guided B cell treatments. And I like to say, and I really want to be clear in my languaging around that, I'm not treating Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis or mild cognitive impairment with that. I'm actually treating a person, and I'm giving the body's innate ability to heal the right information. And why I make that differentiation is I don't have the research to say I'm treating any of those conditions. And so I want to be clear with what we're offering people when I say I'm doing this treatment, because it is a newer treatment. We do know the first tenet in medicine is do no harm. And that we have a very big safety profile on that. But we also have some evidence that it is actually, we've got clinical evidence that it is beneficial and it works. And so we do treat people, giving their body the right information to help it give its the biggest percentage and healing potential. Now, some people say, well, Dr. Eckel, there's not enough evidence, so I don't think you should be doing that procedure. And to a point, I agree. And to a point, I don't agree. Meaning, I have lived through a condition that had no known cure. And so I wasn't willing to wait. I didn't have 20 to 30 years to wait for the research to come in to have that. So I do think on conditions that we have no proper good solution, we should give people the ability to try as long as they have informed consent. And so that's what we offer. We offer big informed consent on that. And, we've got testimonials, we've got, video evidence of it. You'll see some pretty dramatic changes in people. It's nothing that I have seen in 21 years of practicing medicine. And it's an exciting time to be alive, is what I have to say about that.
That's really cool. So the stem cell is a big part of things. You mentioned some studies on hyperbarics as well. Also useful part, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah. So when you look at it, I call it the gorilla, right? You got the gorilla on the teeter totter, and it didn't just show up overnight. And so this isn't a one trick pony type of therapy. This is a programmatic, like developing enough velocity so that we can get in there and straighten out your teeter totter, so to speak. Because neurodegeneration it's not just one causative factor, it's multifactorial. And so it's really designing a program in that fancy approach. So hyperbaric oxygen, photobiomodulation, acupuncture, Chinese botanicals, nutritionals, regenerative therapies, all of these things go into the program. There's some amazing information. The hyperbarics, we'll just start with that. Hyperbaric oxygen, right? This was designed and developed for over 40 years for divers coming up from deep sea diving. They get the bends. They have nitrogen attached to the red blood cells. And as they come up to 1 atmosphere of pressure, because going under the water, you get extra atmospheric pressure put on your body, nitrogen attaches. And so it was stuck and it wasn't allowing oxygen to come onto the red blood cells. So they discovered, well, let's put them under pressure, similar to what they were under the water, get the nitrogen off, and then allow the oxygen to come back, and then slowly bring them back to 1 atmosphere of pressure. That was kind of the development of it. Paul Harsh has an amazing book called The Oxygen Revolution. He's out of Louisiana. He's done a majority of the research in the United States, and he goes through multiple conditions where he's shown benefit for folks with just hyperbarics as a standalone. It's anti-inflammatory, helps heal the brain. We got Dr. Amen with the Amen Clinic showing on SPECT analysis with mold brains, concussions, traumatic brain injuries, showing very holy brains, meaning not a lot of oxygen receptor sites, and then post hyperbaric and nutritionals having a very colorful, fully engorged, oxygenated brain. So a healthy brain again. So we've got a lot of evidence to support hyperbarics use in neurodegeneration in general. I've put it also in on a longevity play on helping support any long-term consequences or damages of, for brain health. So hyperbarics are amazing that way. We also use an oxygen concentrator inside the tank. And it is hours in the tank. If you just used hyperbarics as a standalone therapy, 1 session, 90 minutes, you're not really going to come out feeling like Superwoman or Superman. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, I did hyperbarics. It didn't do anything for me. I was like, well, what was your expectation? Because it's really more of a cumulative hours in the tank. Dr. Harsh is really suggesting 32 hours minimum. I have it as part of Camp Nature Cures out here as a part to really help the regenerative process and support the therapeutics that we're kind of putting into the body. So the B cells, et cetera. So I have that as a complementary component. I do encourage people to continue doing hyperbarics back when they return to their local community if they have it available to them. And then the photobiomodulation, the light therapy, this we use PEMF and low level laser therapy. So pulsed electromagnetic frequency and low level laser therapy. So it's red light therapy and then blue light, red light, and then a PEMF. So these are different frequencies. And I really do feel in healthcare, we are moving more into frequency and resonance therapies. So this is with sound and light. Amazing stuff coming out around light therapies. It's a great, I think it's called Power Tools by Dr. William Polachek. Has a great resource for everybody on PEMF in particular. He goes through with all of the research on all of the different conditions for where PEMF has been valuable. So he's really done us a good service on pulling that all together. But there's some great information around neurodegeneration, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, even just fatigue for that matter. But we have that on the table when people are getting acupuncture. So I also use Chinese medicine as a component of my framework of assessment and of treatment. And that really works on blood flow. Everybody talks about qi. I don't like to talk about qi so much other than, it exists and we need it, right? But blood flow, we can understand in the West. Like we like blood in our bodies, not on the floor. We can all get behind that statement. And it's the healing properties of the body travel in the blood. Oxygen, vitamins, minerals go into the cells, carbon dioxide, waste products come out. And all of your hormones travel in the blood. Your immune system travels in the blood. The neurotransmitters travel in the blood. So with a lack of blood flow, you have degeneration, disease, and destruction. So we want to encourage blood flow. And that's how I talk about and use acupuncture in Chinese medicine, is that it's really allowing the energy to move the blood to help the body heal. So we wake up the vital force of the body and encourage direction to certain areas of the body to increase blood flow. An amazing point back here called Gallbladder 20, and they've done research on stimulating and kind of toning up or down that point, and they'll show on functional MRI an increase or a decrease of blood flow to the brain with that point. Now, do we know how that works? I don't think we can specifically say. There's about 5 main theories that are pretty compelling on how Chinese medicine acupuncture works, but really it's on regulating blood flow is the take home there. Yeah.
So big picture, the brains can repair. There's ways in which that does on an ongoing basis, and there's ways in which that can be encouraged when it's needed. So
Yeah.
really, really cool. Those who want to know more, we're going to get all the links out for you. Nature Cure Clinic, would that be the best general place to direct people toward? Or
Yeah. Nature Cures Clinic. So cures with an S, clinic.
Cures plural.
And then there's 2 videos that I wanted to offer to your viewers and listeners.
Yeah.
It's of cloud hands and super brain yoga. And these are 2 techniques for helping regulate the right and left hemisphere of the brain. And also your happiness quotient. So there's been some research on super brain yoga, which is basically just doing squats in this fashion. But there's some really compelling evidence, and actually it is a really good exercise to do on a daily basis. So I put those videos together for your audience and viewers, and people can go there and check those out.
We'll share those too. That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Greg. Any final words of encouragement or hope for people? Or
I think in particular, where I'm going in medicine is really encouraging you to be your best guarantee and really listening. We as providers, as naturopathic doctors, one of the things that I pride myself is on listening. When people come in, you tell us exactly what we need to know and what the path is that we're going. And encouragement that nobody knows your body more than you do. And do not put up with we don't know, there's no known cure, you're just getting old, get used to it. Like all of those are cop out responses to what is going on with you and your body. And so you owe it to yourself to keep looking. connect up with Dr. C, reach out to me. Our profession as a whole, we can help support you in finding the right people to help you on your specific path. So don't give up. Keep your heart open, and lots of love to you.
That's awesome. I can't think of better closing. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Greg. Hope to see you real soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Hey, Dr. Christianson here. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode. Is there a topic you'd like me to cover? I'd love to hear from you. Just go to Dr. Alan Christianson on Facebook or Instagram, write your question, and use the hashtag #MedicalMyths. Did you find this show helpful? If so, please take a minute and leave us a rating on iTunes so that others can know. Thanks much, and I'll be back with you real soon. Bye-bye.